watched my 4-year-old daughter die. The worst part is that I already knew it was coming, and my wife knew too. Years before her death, we made a decision that brought us power, influence, and a growing ministry. But every covenant has a price. When the time came to pay ours, the spirit behind our success demanded something neither of us expected. Today, I am finally confessing why our daughter died and the secret we buried with her. My daughter was 4 years old when everything began to fall apart. Until then, she had been a healthy, energetic child. She laughed constantly. She filled our house with joy. She was the kind of child who could make even the most difficult day feel lighter. Then one morning, she woke up complaining of pain. At first, my wife and I thought it was something minor, perhaps a fever or an infection. We took her to a nearby hospital. The doctors examined her and prescribed medication. We expected her condition to improve. Instead, it became worse. Within days, she developed strange symptoms that seemed to change every time we sought treatment. We prayed, we fasted, but nothing seemed to help. What frightened us most was that no doctor could explain exactly what was happening. The test results were confusing. One report suggested a problem, the next contradicted it. The medical experts themselves appeared uncertain. As our daughter's condition worsened, something even more disturbing began happening inside our home. My wife started having dreams, the same dream, again and again. She would wake up in the middle of the night shaking, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming. In the dream, she saw a dark figure standing beside our daughter's bed. The figure never spoke. It simply watched. Night after night, the dream returned. At first, I dismissed it as fear. Any mother watching her child suffer would eventually become overwhelmed. But then, I started noticing changes in my wife. She became withdrawn, restless, terrified. She would stare at our daughter for long periods without saying a word. One evening, after another frightening dream, she looked directly at me. The fear in her eyes was unlike anything I had ever seen. And suddenly, I remembered something I had spent years trying to forget. A promise, a covenant, an agreement we had made long before our daughter was born. For years, we convinced ourselves it no longer mattered. We told ourselves it had been buried in the past. But as I watched my daughter grow weaker and my wife grew more frightened, I could no longer ignore what was happening. My wife had remembered it too. Neither of us wanted to say the words aloud, because saying them would mean admitting the truth, the sickness, the dreams, the fear. None of it was random. The spirit had finally come for payment. The truth is that my wife and I did not begin our ministry with evil intentions. Like many young pastors, we genuinely believe we had been called to serve God. We rented small halls. We spent our own money organizing programs that few people attended. For years, we struggled. No matter how hard we worked, the church refused to grow. Meanwhile, other ministries around us seemed to explode overnight. Pastors who had started after us were building large auditoriums. People traveled long distance to attend their crusades. Their names were everywhere. Their influence kept increasing. But we told ourselves not to compare, and eventually we did. The frustration slowly became desperation, and desperation has a way of making dangerous ideas sound reasonable. During this difficult period, we got to know a man who was not a member of our church. He rarely spoke about himself, but he seems to know an unusual amount about ministries and ministers. At first, he appeared helpful. He attended a few services. He encouraged us. Then one evening, after a disappointing program with very few attendees, he asked a question that changed everything. He asked whether we wanted our ministry to remain small forever. That question stayed with us, especially me. A few weeks later, he introduced us to someone else, an older spiritual figure who lived far away from the city. The meeting was arranged in secret. My wife and I traveled there together. I didn't do any of this without my wife's involvement. Even today, I remember how isolated the place felt. There were no crowds, no church signs, no indications of what happened there. The man welcomed us warmly. He talked about our struggles, the financial pressure, the lack of growth, the feeling that we were working hard whilst others advanced ahead of us. He told us that success was available to anyone willing to pay their proper price. At the time, those words sounded harmless, but we were wrong. That night, he led us through a ceremony that neither my wife nor I fully understood. There were prayers, there were promises, there were vows, and there were things we were instructed never to reveal to anyone. The man assured us that our ministry would change, people would begin seeking us out, miracles would increase, influence would grow, doors that had always remained closed would suddenly open. But before we left, he made one final statement. He said every covenant carries an obligation, every blessing carries a price. Now, we were made to make a promise that if the promises comes true, the Spirit can take what it pleases, especially the fruit. And for a while, everything happened exactly as he predicted. Within months, getting to a year, our church began growing. Visitors arrived in numbers we had never experienced before. Offerings increased. Programs became successful. Word spread rapidly. Soon, we were traveling to different cities, then different regions, then different countries. The ministry became profitable. Years passed. Then our daughter became sick. At first, we refused to connect the two events. To us, it was an impossible thing, but the signs kept increasing. The dreams became more frequent. The fear in our home became unbearable. Then the warnings started. My wife would wake up in tears after seeing the same figure standing beside our daughter's bed. Sometimes she heard footsteps in empty rooms. Sometimes our daughter spoke about seeing a stranger watching her at night. At first, we thought children say unusual things all the time, but then she began describing details that matched the dreams my wife had been having. That was when panic entered our home. For the first time in years, we contacted the same people who had introduced us to the covenant. The answers they gave us were not comforting. Instead, they reminded us of something we had tried very hard to forget. Nothing received through a covenant remains free forever, and every agreement eventually reaches its day of collection. As our daughter's condition continued to deteriorate, the truth became impossible to avoid. The sickness was not the real warning. The dreams were not the real warning. The repeated signs were not the real warning. They were all messages pointing towards one terrifying reality. The covenant had reached the end of its term, and the payment being demanded was not money. It was not property. It was not our ministry. It was our daughter. That was the moment my wife and I realized the thing we feared most. We had spent years believing the covenant would only affect us. We never imagined it would reach the child we loved more than our own lives. The day our daughter died was strangely quiet. After months of hospital visits, prayers, fasting, and desperate attempts to save her, there came a moment when the struggle simply ended. The doctors did what they could, Family members continued praying. Church members filled our phones with messages of encouragement. But none of it changed the outcome. Our daughter was gone. I remember looking at my wife when the news was confirmed. Neither of us cried immediately. We simply stared at each other because deep inside, we both knew something that nobody else in that room knew. This was not a surprise. It was a collection, and that knowledge haunted us from the very first moment. When word spread, the church reacted exactly as people would expect. Members rushed to support us. Some brought food, others donated money. Many organized prayer meetings for our family. The congregation surrounded us with sympathy. Some questioned why God would allow such a tragedy. Others said our daughter's death was a test of faith. Listening to them was a torture, not because they were wrong, but because they were comforting us based on a story that wasn't true. Every kind word felt another weight on my conscience. Every prayer felt like another reminder of the secret my wife and I were carrying. Then came the funeral. It was one of the largest gatherings our church had ever seen. Pastors traveled from different places to attend. Members filled every available seat. Tributes were read. Prayers were offered. People cried openly. My wife stood beside the small coffin and wept. I stood beside her, and together we performed the role everyone expected from grieving parents. But inside, something was already breaking. After the funeral, life continued around us. Church services resumed. Programs continued. People still came for prayers. The ministry remained successful. From the outside, it appeared that we were slowly recovering. But the truth was very different. The guilt followed us everywhere. It sat with us during meals. It followed us into church services. It followed us into our bedroom at night. Sleep became difficult. My wife often woke up terrified. Sometimes she would sit upright in bed, shaking. Sometimes she would refuse to go back to sleep. The dreams had returned. Only now they were worse. I had my own nightmares. I would see my daughter's face. I would hear her voice. I would wake up drenched in sweat, unable to escape the feeling that we had traded something priceless for something that no longer mattered. As the months passed, the strain on our marriage became impossible to ignore. We rarely spoke about what had happened. When we did, the conversations usually ended in silence. Neither of us wanted to blame the other, because the truth was that we had both made the decision. We had both accepted the promises. We had both ignored the warnings. And now, we were both living with the consequences. The ministry that once brought us pride became a constant reminder of our loss. Every successful program, every testimony, every offering, every standing ovation, instead of making us happy, they reminded us of what had been taken. For years, we chased influence, recognition, and power, and in the end, none of it brought peace. Because we had gained everything we wanted and lost the one person we loved most. Before people knew our names, before the large crowds, before the invitations and recognition, my wife and I were struggling to keep our ministry alive. There were Sundays when our chairs were empty than occupied. There were months when the church offerings could barely cover basic expenses. We kept telling ourselves that things would improve. But year after year, we remained stuck. The moment that changed everything happened during one of our lowest periods. A businessman from another town had approached me for prayers concerning a major contract he was pursuing. He believed God would help him through my ministry. Over several months, he supported the church financially. He donated generously. He trusted me. Eventually, he handed me a significant amount of money. to help facilitate a project we had discussed. I truly believed things would work out, but the project failed. The contract never materialized. The money disappeared into expenses and commitments that produced no results. At first, the man was patient. Then he became angry. Then one Sunday, he arrived at the church without warning. The service had already started. My wife was seated in the front row. That day, the man walked through the church door demanding answers as well as his money. In front of everyone, he spoke about the money. He accused me of deceiving him. He questioned my integrity. The entire church felt silent. I can still remember the feeling. Standing on the altar, unable to stop him, unable to defend myself, watching my wife lower her head in embarrassment, watching members exchange uncomfortable looks, watching people who trusted me begin to question who I really was. That day broke something inside me. After the service ended, my wife and I sat for hours. Neither of us spoke much. The shame was overwhelming. Weeks afterwards, attendance dropped. People talked. Rumors spread. Some members left. Others stopped supporting the ministry. It felt as though everything we had spent years building was collapsing around us. That was when that desperation entered our lives. Not ordinary desperation, the kind that makes people vulnerable to ideas they would normally reject. The kind that makes dangerous shortcuts appear reasonable. We became obsessed with finding a way out. We wanted our ministry restored. We wanted respect restored. We wanted people to stop talking about us. We wanted success badly enough that we stopped asking whether certain opportunities were worth the cost. Looking back now, that public humiliation was the moment our judgment began to fail. The embarrassment, the frustration, the fear of failure, all of it pushed us towards the very people who promised easy answers. And that was how we became vulnerable to a covenant that would eventually demand more than we were ever prepared to give. Today, years after our daughter's death, if you ask me whether the success was worth it, the truth is that I stopped enjoying that success a long time ago. The truth is, the crowds were still there. The offerings were still coming. People still invited us to preach. From the outside, our ministry appeared stronger than ever. But inside our home, everything had changed. The peace was gone. The joy was gone. Even our marriage began to suffer. There were days when my wife and I could sit in the same room for hours without speaking to each other. Not because we hated each other, but because every conversation eventually led back to the same memory, the same loss, the same secret, the same question. Was any of it worth it? The ministry that once represented our greatest achievement slowly became a prison where every testimony reminded us of what we had lost, where every successful program reminded us of the price that had been paid. Every time someone called us blessed, a part of me felt like a fraud. And for years, we carried that burden in silence until the secret became too heavy to carry any longer. The nightmares continued, the fear continued, the guilt continued, and eventually, we realized that no amount of success could bury the truth. That is why I finally decided to confess. Not because it will bring our daughter back, not because it will erase the past, but because some secrets destroy the people who keep them. Today, let our story serve as a warning to anyone who becomes so desperate for success that they stop questioning the cost. A warning to anyone who believes every door that opens must be entered, and a warning to anyone who thinks power is more than the people they love. If power demands the life of someone you love, then it was never a blessing. That is the lesson my wife and I learned too late. Our daughter paid a price that should never have been paid, and that is why we are finally telling the truth.